Hey everyone, Anthony Fantano here, internet's busiest music nerd. I hope you're doing well. And it's time for a thing on this channel that I almost never do, and that's a movie review. Straight off the dome, my thoughts on the new Ari Aster movie, Beau is Afraid, starring Joaquin Phoenix, as well as Nathan Lane, who when I first saw him on screen, I fucking lost it. But if you guys are unfamiliar with writer and director Ari Aster's work, which you should be if you're into film at all, but he's had some hits with A24 in the recent past, Hereditary. Fucking love that movie. Also, obviously, Midsommar, which is kind of a cultural force of sorts. Some consider it to be one of the best cult-themed movies of all time. I prefer Hereditary to it, but the one thing I will say about Midsommar is I think a lot of the cinematography and the outfits and the color palettes across the movie are fantastic. Never have I seen a movie with so many horrible things going on in it that is so colorful and is so bright and in a way is so warm. Now, the massive success of those two films, at least, relative to A24's typical output, has clearly put the production company and Ari in a position where he's kind of their golden child, at least up until now. He could pretty much do no wrong. It seems that A24 had allowed him to pretty much just do whatever the hell he wanted the third time around here. Let me tell you, this movie is absolutely insane. They dumped $35 million into it, and I don't think there's ever going to be another movie like it. Not just because I don't think there's going to be another director out there like Ari, that there's going to be another thought coming out of even a similar director's head that aligns with what we see here in this film, and on top of it, to have the budget on top of it to execute something this massive and indulgent and over the top. That's kind of a stars align moment that we're probably only going to see one time in this instance right here, right now. The film, again, if you have not seen, massive budget, especially for an A24 film. It is 3 entire hours long and essentially works in 4 sections. Now, if you go throughout YouTube, you'll see no shortage of reviews that essentially function as a synopsis for the film. I don't know how much at this point that would really be of service to anybody clicking on a video such as this. As you may already know by now, the film essentially works in 4 parts. Much of the first 2 parts are spent kind of giving the audience different angles and sensations having to do with the main character, played again by Joaquin Phoenix, Beau. We're getting a lot of scenes, dialogue, interactions, and plot points that essentially illustrate his depression, his anxiety disorder. I don't want to spoil too many details of what exactly goes on in the film, because I think part of the movie's appeal and what makes it hit in the way that it does is kind of the element of surprise that it has in a lot of cases. And when I say that, I don't mean just in kind of like a horror sense, because don't go into this film assuming it's a horror piece like Hereditary, or even, kind of creepy or shocking in the way that Midsommar was. While there are many shocking parts of Beau is Afraid, many of those shocking parts are actually absurdly and outlandishly funny, which is, I guess, what I want to get more into, how this film made me feel. I've seen a lot of movies over the course of my lifetime, both in the theaters and at home, and I've never been to a film or experienced one that simultaneously had me so freaked out and on edge, but at the same time also had me laughing as loud and as consistently as I was. A lot of that may come down to whatever your personal sense of humor is, but like when some absolutely crazy, batshit insane stuff would go down on the screen that's completely unforeseen, I would just lose it. Because like, what is this? Why is this happening? Like, it's complete pandemonium for scene after scene after scene after scene. And of course, there are some moments where things kind of like calm down and Ari kind of eases up on the gas and pumps the brakes a little bit, but that's only to set you up for something even more horrible coming down the pipe. I guess a way of explaining this device and this progression of things without spoiling what occurs in the movie would be to say that Beau obviously as somebody who's suffering severely with anxiety issues, with self-esteem issues, is constantly in this mindset of what is the worst thing that could happen in any given moment, which if you are the type of person, or you know the type of person who is constantly seeing things in that way, viewing things constantly in a negative, you know how those thoughts feel or how they can impact yours or somebody else's decisions, like, oh, I might not do this or not do this because, oh, what if this horrible thing happens, or what if this other horrible thing happens, and so on and so forth. Like, imagine that, but those things are actually happening and actually coming to life in the world that Beau is immersed in. And not only are they happening, but they're magnified times 10 in terms of how bad they actually are. They're magnified to the point where they're just beyond imagination. Like, nothing in this man's world goes right. And as the film goes on, obviously there are a lot of hints and a lot of points and a lot of nods and suggestions that much of this comes back to his childhood and the fact that he is such a demure kind of person. He is passive. He's not only passive in general, he's passive in his own life in terms of like what controls him and what influences him. He essentially has no spine. Yes, this is sort of a choice to a degree, but also he was kind of reared and raised to be this way as well. Somebody who is easily manipulated and controlled. The first two chapters of the film are really just like a freaking thrill ride in terms of just all the insane stuff going on. It's really outlandish and nonstop to the point where it's difficult to pull together a literal storyline out of it because it all feels like a completely surreal nightmare going on at all times. It's just a total fucking roller coaster, and within this span of time, you're getting like a normal movie's amount of stimulation. There's still so much more to go from here. I'll say these first two chapters of the film account for maybe the most intense movie-going experience that I've ever had, and that alone like makes going to see this, or even, you know, popping in with it when it eventually hits streaming, worth it. Beyond that, we hit the third chapter, which is where I've seen most of the criticisms of this film crop up in terms of like the reviews that I've caught. It's this very colorful theatrical dream sequence whose, you know, images and aesthetics are a total switch up from the rest of the film. Takes me out of the movie a little bit, but it's still very engaging and beautiful and compelling. This portion of the film lasts a very long time, and in some ways I think it's pretty significant because it draws so many parallels with what you've seen up until that point. And for the character Beau himself, it's an attempt at sort of illustrating, here's what your life would be like or could be if you know, actually like decided to live your life rather than, you know, just kind of exist in it passively or just live in a state of constant fear. Now, again, this portion of the movie is very long. It's like really another epic part of the story, but at least within the storyline, what we can understand of the storyline, because it's so crazy and fragmented and there is so little going on that we can interpret as literal. From what we can tell, this whole thing, this whole experience just happens within one single evening. So it's not like this crazy journey that like, you know, totally upends the entire progression of the story or anything like that. It's just kind of like a whole cinema of the mind thing happening within the head of the main character. And it's just more for the audience to kind of see and experience as far as like, you know, further understanding the film's message in terms of, you know, anxiety, fear, self-esteem, and a whole host of other things. Regardless of any criticisms of this portion of the movie being too long or unnecessary or annoying, which, you know, could be valid to a degree. It is a very lengthy movie at 3 hours, and, you know, a lot of people frankly don't want to sit down for a 3-hour film. I personally don't find myself going to the movies that often generally, and when I do go out to the movies, it's usually because I'm super into a particular director, or I've heard secondhand that the experience of a certain film was kind of unique or weird or offbeat, and I just kind of want to get into the theater and see whatever the heck that is. I'm usually not going to, you know, the movies for kind of a regular experience. I'm not taking myself out regularly to see, like, you know, the new Fast and Furious movie or Transformers movie. Fuck that. Call me pretentious, but I don't give a shit. It is long and it does add a lot of length to the film. However, if you took it out or if you cut it back, you would lose a lot of eye candy in the movie, honestly, and I found a lot of the scenes and a lot of the visuals throughout this portion to be some of the most emotionally impactful in the entire film, and I don't know if, I would rather they be gone. I feel like they added to my movie-going experience overall. I don't know, so much of everything that you see in the movie feels like a nightmare to some degree anyway. There's so many things about the world that Beau exists in where, every moment, every setting, every person just seems a little bit off and just not really in touch with reality. Truly, what is it to go into a dream sequence in the midst of a nightmare sequence anyway? Plus, the chapters of the film surrounding this sequence, for the most part, are just really unnerving and disturbing and hilarious and dark and ridiculous. It's nice to have this little oasis of sorts in the midst of the film where, even though it is a weird theatrical motif or passage, things almost kind of like make sense here. You could kind of get your grasp of things through this epic hero's tale of sorts in this portion of the film. I think it does add to the overall experience again. But beyond here, we take a very dark turn in the last chapter where Beau essentially faces down, his mother, his childhood, just everything that has happened up until this point who kind of made him the person he is. That battle, if you could call it that, does not have the most optimal outcome. I mean, without saying too much in terms of like literally what happens, I remember when the film ended, one of the first things I heard when the credits started to roll was this lady and her friends got up behind me and started walking out of the theater, and she had said, "Well, that was depressing." And that was the other thing. There was one woman who I'm pretty sure just like pieced out an hour into the movie and just like walked out of the damn thing. Even though the theater was not packed, I could like really feel over the course of the film, everybody collectively getting more tired and more traumatized by everything that they were seeing on the screen. And while there were a lot of points, even toward the end of the film, where I was like laughing and kind of losing my shit at how outlandish some of the stuff I was seeing was, it felt weirder and weirder continuing to laugh at some of this stuff because I was hearing fewer people in the theater laughing and hearing and seeing more like proclamations such as like, "What the fuck?" as there were just a lot of people there who couldn't believe what they were seeing on the screen. One other thing I'll say about this movie is even though it was intense and disorienting and in a lot of respects jarring, I can't say there was anything in the film that when reflecting back on it, and there was a lot to reflect on, that made absolutely no sense whatsoever. And let me clarify this. I don't mean everything I was seeing on the screen was like a sensible presentation of actions and events. Obviously, that's not the case. What I mean is there is so much subtext to the movie, and everything occurring does add to the overall message of the film, even if it does make sometimes the narrative difficult to follow. Because that's kind of the thing. While this movie does have a narrative of sorts, if you're looking to grab onto that and simply hold on to it to carry you from the start to the end of the film in kind of like a, safe and predictable way, you're going to be severely disappointed. The message and the subtext of the movie, if you're going to get anything out of this film, and if you're going to, have like even a good time watching it and have some, important takeaways from it, it's going to be more about kind of latching onto that. This movie is just drowning in subtext at all points. Subtext is just oozing from every corner of it. When you're seeing something on the screen, it's not really a question of what does this mean for the storyline or how does this progress us to the next point. It's really more about what does this say about anxiety? What does this say about fear? What does this say about being manipulated? What does this say about not being able to overcome various mental adversities and traumas? What does this say about being like a passenger in your own life. When you're feeling those things and experiencing those things, what drives you into that space? What are the negatives and the cons, the punishments for, being that way or having that mindset? I don't know if I want to kind of get into, the details of this film anymore, because I think if I do, I'll be spoiling too much. But I'll leave this saying, I loved the movie. I loved it. I would like to watch it again, maybe in chunks. I don't know if I would immediately jump back into the full 3-hour experience. I think I would like to watch the first portion and then stop it and kind of take it in and sort of like see how I feel about it, or see if there's anything I didn't pick up the first time around. Then maybe a little while later, pick up the second chapter, put it down, and kind of approach it like that. But again, loved the movie. One of the most impactful experiences I've had in the theater. However, I have a hard time making the jump to recommending it in a way, because I feel like the act of recommending this movie is like, actively recommending people undergo like potentially a triggering experience. Because like there were a lot of people in the theater who had a bad time watching this, like very very clearly. It's hard knowingly recommending something that I think people are going to have a bad time experiencing. With an album, you could always kind of turn it off or kind of skip a track if you feel like something sucks or you're not into it or whatever. Going out to the theater and sort of subjecting yourself to like a whole 3-hour film just filled with all of these like shocking, traumatic images and like weird, freaky, scary, but also funny, occurrences and scenes. It's a lot. I'm like really asking for people to really put themselves through something. If I'm to kind of jump on here and say, yeah, go see this movie. Yeah, go see this crazy ass movie. Which I guess at the end of the day, just by virtue of saying that I loved it and I thought it was great and I'm always going to remember this movie, I am kind of doing that. But I mean, I think I would hope I've given you guys enough fair warning in terms of like what this is and what is in it, so that you kind of know what you're getting into if you decide to, go ahead and put some time toward experiencing this movie. And if you are somebody who has, experienced some of the feelings and the emotional struggles that I've kind of described Beau as having in this film, I think this movie is really going to speak to you and say a lot to you, maybe more than you're kind of like willing to deal with or process in that moment. But, ultimately, when you finally kind of wade through the muck and the insanity of what the film throws in front of you, it might be something that you get a lot out of. And yeah, I guess I can leave it there. Nutso freaking film, Ari. Nutso film. You're a nutty guy.